This is Redden from Tempest, and I'm here again to bring you guys another boss strategy guide. This time we'll be taking a closer look at the 6th encounter in the new Scum and Villainy SOTOR operation, which puts your raid up against the Warlord Council. These guys act as the second to last boss fight in the instance, and it seems that in their last ditch effort, the Dreadmasters thought it would be a smart idea to throw a few bounty hunters in our path, hoping that they would be an obstacle. All I'm going to say here is that if this is the only ace up the Dreadmaster's sleeves, then we're in for a walk in the park. As usual, I'd like to remind you all that this is PTS footage, meaning the encounters can still be changed significantly before going live. In this particular case, and in all honesty, I really hope that they do change this fight, as it is the easiest fight in the entire operation by a significant margin, and is underwhelming to the degree of actual disappointment. Traditionally, council fights which contain more than 2 bosses have a reputation of being very technical and very difficult. Sadly, neither of those 2 descriptions fit this encounter. Now that I'm done with my mini rant, let's get into the mechanics of the fight. The Warlord Council acts as a 4-phase encounter to some degree. As soon as you get into the area, a cool cinematic which makes these guys look like total badasses greets you with a smirk. Let's get to know our 4 Warlord NPCs. All 4 of them have 3 buffs in common. They are all unshakable, thus making them immune to interrupts. They all have the regular boss immunities, so they can't be controlled or snared in any way. And they all have a buff which imposes a very familiar mechanic named Battle Companions. This buff ensures that whenever one of the Warlords dies, the others are healed up, meaning they need to die one at a time. First from the right is Captain Horik. Aside from the 3 buffs I just mentioned, Horik is also untauntable, so he can't be tanked or moved. The only significant mechanic that he does is that he focus fires a single raid member, firing a volley of shots in a frontal cone towards that player. Second from the right is a hairy fella named 2 Chuck. Chuck is the marauder of the group, and he has no additional buffs other than the 3 common ones. He does need to be tanked, and he does do some pretty heavy damage on the tank that holds his threat though. He also likes to regularly hit his target with a knockback, and the knockback is only problematic due to the room itself. If you go near any of the 4 walls, you gain a debuff named Near Wall, which states that if you get knocked back into the wall with this buff on you, you die instantly. You can avoid this entire mechanic by simply staying away from the walls. Next up is Sunder the Tin Man. He has a special buff on him which makes him move very slowly. Since he isn't immune to taunts, a tank should hold his aggro while kiting him around the room. If he catches up and hits someone, the damage on them can be significant. Finally, to the far left is Vilas Gar. Like Horik, Gar cannot be tanked because he's immune to taunts. His ability is that he likes to randomly focus people down while teleporting around the room and chucking some grenades at random people. Whenever you kill one of the Warlords, the remaining Warlords gain an ability that they add to their arsenal. Now that we know what each of them does individually, we can get into the strategy. As I said, it's possible to view this fight as a 4-phase encounter, each phase being marked by the death of one of the Warlords. In all honesty, this fight didn't merit very much strategy because we basically one-shot it on our first attempt, and decided not to overcomplicate fights that don't merit a complex strategy. We decided to stack the raid in the middle of the room and focus down Horik first, while our 2 tanks held aggro on Chuck and Sunder separately, and basically everyone ignored Vilas Gar. We decided to kite Chuck because it significantly reduced his damage output, effectively making the 2 kiting tanks take up very little attention from our healers and reducing the difficulty of the encounter by a significant margin. As I said, Horik likes to focus a random player with his frontal attack. The attack itself struck our non-tanks for around 2,000 damage a tick, which is pretty laughable, but we still countered it by having everyone move away from the frontal cone area and stack back up when he was done with his channel. In this phase, Gar will randomly hit people as well, but his damage was also a non-issue for our healers, especially since both tanks were kiting and needed minimal healing. As for the 2 tanks, kiting Sunder is as easy as it gets due to his slow movement buff. If he does catch up to you for some reason, remember that his damage is considered force or tech based, meaning it can only be mitigated by a global damage reduction cooldown, like Invincible, or shrouded by an assassin or a shadow. Defense increasing cooldowns won't save you here, but you can still take a few fair hits from him as a tank. 2 Chuck should also be kited, but his kite is slightly more tricky as he likes to leap and immobilize his target. This makes kiting with a movement immunity like Force Speed for Shadows and Sins or Hydraulic Overrides for Power Techs and Vanguards ideal for this task. A Juggernaut or a Guardian can just as easily get rid of this mechanic by simply interceding or force charging to any target that they see fit. Ignore Vilus, kite Sunder and Chuck, and burn down Horik to get to the next phase. When Horik dies, the remaining bosses gain new abilities. The next target we chose to burn down was Gar. He still randomly teleports and damages people with his blasters and grenades, but he now likes to sneak away and pull a random raider towards him. This mechanic is only problematic because of Sunder's new ability. The new mechanic for Sunder is that he now randomly fixates on different raiders. If a fixate happens with an unlucky pull from Gar, the player will be hit for a large amount of damage, although they won't be one-shot. To counter this, we had the tank that was kiting Sunder simply taunt him back to override the fixate. We found that BioWare kept messing around with the time between the fixates, so the Sunder tank wasn't always able to taunt him for every single one of them. A simple fix to this is to have the 2 Chuck tank support the Sunder tank with some taunts when the Sunder tank's taunts are on cooldown. We were able to achieve this quickly through simple communication. Just make sure that you're a good distance away from Sunder so that he wastes enough time trying to get to you so that the other tank has time for his taunts to come off cooldown. To avoid confusion for this, I'll go through the timeline again. When the Sunder tank sees the message that Sunder has fixated anyone but himself, he should taunt Sunder back immediately. As a precaution, whoever does get fixated should begin to run away from Sunder until they see that the boss is going back to his tank. When the next fixate happens, if the Sunder tank can't taunt him in time, the Chuck tank should taunt him to avoid the fixated player having to move too much or risk them taking damage. The Chuck tank should now kite both bosses, both Sunder and Chuck, for a short while until the next fixate occurs, at which point the original Sunder tank should taunt him back. If the Sunder tank taunts him off of the Chuck tank before the next fixate, you'll find yourselves in a slightly displeasing situation, where both tanks are out of taunts and he's fixating a non-tank. As I said, the best precaution is to make whoever gets fixated run away, just in case, and make sure that the tanks are waiting for the next fixate to taunt off of each other. Aside from all of this, Sunder now also gains the ability of throwing an axe at his kiter, immobilizing them for 2 to 3 seconds. To counter this, simply keep a bigger gap between yourself and Sunder, and he should never catch up to you, even after the immobilize. Use any movement increases or snare breaks if you need to. This can make the taunt switches between the tanks a little more complex, because Sunder may throw an axe at the Chuck tank for the time that his aggro is on him. It's not very difficult to figure out when a leap from Chuck will immobilize you versus when an axe from Sunder will immobilize you, and when each of them is a potential problem. Focus down Vilus, continue kiting Sunder and Chuck while taunting back Sunder after each fixate, and avoiding getting knocked into a wall from Chuck. When Vilus died, we didn't notice that Sunder or Chuck gained any significant abilities. We focused down Sunder while paying extra attention to the fact that the melee were now stacked on top of him, and a fixate on them usually meant that they took a tick of damage. Heal through it and quickly taunt Sunder off of them while continuously kiting Chuck until Sunder falls over. After Sunder dies, Chuck gains 2 abilities. First, he will summon 3 small adds named Cartel Lieutenants. These guys are immune to CCs and taunts, but luckily we found that their damage was completely negligible. We ignored these guys entirely and focused on burning down Chuck. The second ability that Chuck gains after Sunder's death is that he will start gaining a stacking buff which increases his damage dealt to his tank. To handle this, we had the first tank hold his threat with minimal cooldowns, and as the stacks began to go up, he began to use his defensives in a staggered manner. When that tank's final defensive cooldown ran out, the other tank taunted Chuck and overlapped his defensives, making the increased damage from Chuck very trivial to heal. For the final phase, we stopped kiting Chuck and burned him down, then finished off the adds to complete the encounter. That's all for the fight, guys. As I said, this fight was of little to no challenge, and we really hope that it gets harder by the time the expansion goes live. If that does happen, be sure to be subscribed to our channel to stay updated for when we release new strategy guides, and be sure to like this video if you enjoyed the content or found it useful. Please remember that we live on the Prophecy of the Five server, and that we would always love to hear from you. I'll catch you guys in our next video.